We're starting into a new series today that I have entitled Virtue and Vice, where we're going to be pairing the 7 deadly sins and the fruit of the Spirit. And we're going to put them in conversation together and see how they might speak to one another, critique one another, or clarify something for us. In order to do that, I want to read to you the fruit of the Spirit, which comes from Galatians chapter 5, begins in verse 22. By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against such things, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, competing against one another, envying one another. Whenever we come to a list or a proposal, one of the things we have to be careful of is that you and I don't come to things clean. We don't come neutral. We don't come to any conversation as a blank slate with no previous history. You and I bring to any conversation or any engagement like this, we bring our preconceived notions and our understandings and our experiences and our personalities and our temperaments, and we bring all of these things into the conversation. Well, one of the things that is sort of across the board, something we have to always account for and attend to, is that you and I have been sold and groomed and conditioned in either or thinking. We're just well practiced because of this world that we live in, this time that we live in good and bad, black and white. And so when we're given a list of virtues, say like the fruit of the Spirit, we often say, well, these are the good things. And then we automatically are able to contrast them with bad things. Well, that might be a good way to start any approach or sort of begin step one entry point for considering something like the fruit of the spirits or any list of virtues and values. But what I want to put in front of you is that this either or way of thinking is actually so limited that it ends up becoming a problem later down the road. Because anytime we hold something as the good or the best, then anything else is sort of seen as bad. And so we just automatically think in this good, bad, or best and other categorization, and it can become a real problem for us in that if we're not living up to our best expectations or our highest calling, then we feel like somehow we've been failures or we've let down or we've underachieved or that we're not doing enough or trying hard enough or whatever it is, we're not striving. So I want to put forward a different way of thinking about this. And for the next several weeks, we're going to wrestle with this. I want to put in front of you this old Aristotelian idea of virtues that what is presented to us, for us, the fruit of the Spirit, and we're going to contrast that with the 7 deadly sins, is actually not the highest of intensity or the greatest of good, but that what is being asked of us is actually sort of a balanced, healthy, whole approach that avoids extremes. One of the problems with either or thinking is that it leads to extremes, because you are either at the greatest value or you're not. And there's not a lot of room to maneuver. I'll give you a couple examples. If I were to ask you to define courage, and I'm going to give you a second to think about it, how would you define courage? Or have you heard a good definition of courage. Let's talk about that as a value. So take a minute and think about it. So anybody online or in person, do you have a good definition of courage? Something come to your mind? Yeah, go ahead. All right, we've got several examples. Glennis, throw something out. Cowardice, the opposite of cowardice. Okay, Gail, what do you have? When you're facing something you're afraid of, but you're able to overcome it. I like that one. Minda? Action in the face of fear. I really like going down this road. Online, anybody have a contribution?
Yes, doing something that you normally would not do because of fear.
Yeah, doing something you would normally not do because of fear. Thank you, Marilyn. Barbara. Right. There's an old joke that the top two fears when most people are polled is public speaking and dying. And Jerry Seinfeld's joke is that means that at a funeral, most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Right? That's true. Public speaking. So we did a good job with defining courage, not in contrast only, right, to cowardice, but in saying that it is facing your fears, right, and overcoming them. That's a perfect example of what we're going to be doing with the fruit of the Spirit. So instead of holding up the fruit of the Spirit and saying love, and then what do I say, what's the opposite of love? Hate, but it's not. The opposite of love is indifference. Right? So this is where we get into a limited kind of thinking, is that when we oversimplify things, when we're so groomed and conditioned that we go love and hate. But what I want to do is remove that either or option, and we want to put love as the fruit of the Spirit and say, what if there's not enough love? And what if there's too much love? Right? So I want to, instead of go love and hate, I want to go love and not caring or indifference and obsession. And I want to hold up love as a healthy middle between indifference and obsession. And we're going to go through all of the fruit of the Spirit this way. And I have paired them, just because I think this is fun, with the 7 deadly sins. All right. And I'm going to come back to the 7 deadly sins in a minute because I'm going to need your help with them. Because as you know, I don't do all of them that well. So I'm going to need I'm recruiting your help to help me with the sin part. So when it comes to things like courage, we did a great job. When it comes to things like love, we're going to have to work. We're going to have to practice a little bit, holding that up as a middle way virtue between two extremes to be avoided. For instance, with courage, if the opposite of courage, right, is cowardice, like Glennis said, but what do you have when you have too much courage? What is it in danger of rolling into if it goes unchecked, right? And that's like a careless, abandoned, maybe a suicidal or a masochistic, right? It rolls into something unhealthy. And we actually have examples of that in our culture where people have so abandoned caution that there's sort of a YOLO, right? You only live once, sort of a I ain't afraid of nothing masculinity. It's almost like it rolls over it. And you say, hold on, bro, that's not courage. That's whatever that is, it's become something else. Because courage unchecked rolls into being something quite unhealthy. It's not that you're not afraid, you're just being an idiot who's aggressive and probably amped up on something, right? That's not courage. So while we want to avoid this extreme of cowardice, when we hold up courage as a virtue, we also want to make sure that we don't roll over into whatever that thing is that's unhealthy. I would throw out a third example for us, which is kindness. If we're going to hold up as the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, if we're going to hold up kindness, I want to ask not what's the opposite of kindness, which is cruelty. I want to ask, what if there's not enough kindness? What do we call that? Right? Like a lack of compassion? What if there's too much kindness and it's not accountable? What's that called? Enabling? Okay. So we're going to have fun over the next 7 weeks with the fruit of the Spirit and the 7 deadly sins by resisting the temptation to pair them as opposites, love and hate. And instead, we're going to hold up love as the ideal and say, what if there's not enough? And what if there's too much that's unchecked? And by doing this, I think that the fruit of the Spirit are going to take on a very different appearance to us. My hope and prayer is that they become an invitation to us to live into a virtue, not in order to avoid, right, the absence of something, but because it's the best way forward for us as people of faith to engage these invitations that we've been given. Here's what I want to avoid. A lot of times in the Bible, when we as 21st century Christians see a list, it somehow becomes a checklist and a to-do list. Let's see, do I have, am I loving? Sometimes. Do I have joy? Not really, right? Like we go through a checklist, but that's not what the fruit of the Spirit are. The fruit of the Spirit, right, because they're fruit, are the natural expression and outgrowth of a life that is rooted in God's Spirit. When we are rooted and grounded in the life of God's Spirit, these things show up naturally in our life. Love grows, joy appears, it wells up. Faithfulness and kindness and goodness and gentleness and self-control. These things appear in our life, a fruit, when we are tapped into the root. This is not a checklist of things to do to be a good Christian. That's what we have to avoid. The fruit of the Spirit are not an assignment. You need to be more loving. You should be kinder. You should do this, right? You should stop doing this. It's not a to-do list. It's not an assignment. It's an invitation to live a different way, a higher way, and a better way. And I want to have fun with it by contrasting it against the historical, the Middle Ages idea of the 7 mortal or deadly sins. And I want to play with that a little bit. So here's where I'm going to need your help. I have on my lectern here. And by the way, those of you who are on Zoom, you'll have to let us know if one of these appeals to you. Here's what I'm looking for out of you to partner with me in this series. If one of these pairings that I'm going to read you in a second, if something intrigues you or sparks your interest, or you think you want to talk about that subject, I need you to volunteer to either write up a page or two about it. Maybe you could read that to us, or the liturgist could read it that Sunday. Or we could put that tall top table out here in the middle, and you could come to the table and we could talk about whatever it is, whatever the thing you've drafted is, all right? You takes as your subject, I'm going to take the other one, and we're going to put them in conversation together and see if they speak to each other, all right? So here are the pairings. First week, which is next week, is love and lust. By the way, these can be moved around. So like if Mary says, I'm doing lust, and then she says, but I'm not here next week, so we can move it back a week, right? So we can move these around. But here are the initial pairings. Love and lust, gluttony and self-control. By the way, I'm definitely preaching on gluttony that week, so I need one of you to speak up for self-control. I am not taking self-control as a Christian hedonist. I'm speaking in favor of gluttony. Just kidding with you. Okay, you can take gluttony if you want. Third week is greed and kindness. We're going to pair those. Fourth week is sloth and joy. Sloth or joy were you cheering for? All right. Next week is wrath and peace. That's our pairing there. Next week is envy and patience. Then pride and goodness. And then in the final week, I just want to talk about the idea of sin and how it has changed over the eras. But then I need somebody to speak in favor of gentleness, because we live in a time where gentleness is not valued very much. So I need somebody to speak in favor of gentleness. All right. So I'm going to leave this here on the lectern. And I'm hoping that after our gathering, if one of you is compelled by any of these topics, that you will come up here and put your name next to it. And we're going to begin the draft board. And we're going to divvy this out and figure out which weeks to work with which ones. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to have fun with it, where we're going to hold it up, not in contrast to an opposite, but as a higher invitation. And what are the two extremes that we're trying to avoid? And then just because it's zesty, we're going to pair it with one of the 7 deadly sins and see if the whole thing looks different when you mix it up like that. All right. So that's what we're going to do this fall. I think it's going to be really great if you all jump in and volunteer to be to speak in favor or against something. And I'll be honest with you, depending on where you wanted to go, like for instance, maybe for one of you, you've had a rough road with one of the 7 deadly sins, either in your personal life or in the family that you came from. And maybe your take on this is going to be more serious. And that's fine too. Just let me know and I'll make sure to partner it with the sermon. So for instance, if one of you is going to share something deep or heavy or, tough to share, I want to make sure that the service reflects that, so that you don't feel like you were supposed to be like a cheerleader and you were a wet towel. I want to make sure that whatever your contribution is prioritized and that we build the rest of the service around them. Okay. So I don't want you to shy away from it just because you think like I need to be a cheerleader for one of these things. If you have something heavy on your heart, we want to hear that too. And so don't be afraid to let us know that you're going to be talking about this, but that it's going to be kind of heavy because you have a track record, right, that you want to share. So I just want to throw that out as a. So are there any questions or comments about what we're up to this fall? All right. Well, I am very excited about this. As you know, we are an interactive church and a conversational community. And so this is a chance for you to bring your unique perspective and insight to this, and for people to be able to hear sort of a different takes. And we're going to put them in dialogue with one another, and we're going to have some fun with it. So